Hello there, and welcome to The Great Comeback. I am your host, Holly McClain, and I am coming to you live on WGSN-DB Going Solo Network, the #1 talk network out there. I'm a life coach and counselor, and I help people come back from big life shifts and upsets. So think big breakups, divorce, career changes, teen struggles. Yes, I work with teens and young adults too. So if it's a life transition that you're going through, together you and I can master plan your comeback. On today's episode, we are talking with art therapist and women's midlife strategist Myriam Martinez. And this episode is all about how you can use your creative energy to support you through your big life transition. When we are stuck or struggling, it can be so hard not to fall into that victim role. Why me? Why now? I just don't know. I'm so confused. And one very important shift that you can make to get yourself out of the victim mentality is to switch over into the creative. The moment you give yourself the opportunity to get creative, try a crafty solution, dream up or think up something different, that victim mentality actually begins to drop off. But we will dig into all of that. So our guest today, Myriam Martinez, is here to talk about all things creative expression. Myriam is a women's midlife strategist and an art therapist with over 15 years experience working with women around the issues of stress, self-inadequacy, and self-identity. She is a successful entrepreneur and the founder of the Women's Creative Corner community. Myriam believes deeply that women are creative, intuitive, intelligent beings that are often conditioned to put themselves last and therefore lose touch with themselves and their inner knowing. Myriam helps women find personal and professional success by learning to love and regard themselves like they would a good friend, putting their needs first and creating the life that they've always wanted. She gently guides women toward a path of learning to embrace their womaninity, love themselves fiercely, and design their life on their terms. Welcome to The Great Comeback, Myriam.
Thanks, Holly. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to have you. The work that you do fascinates me, and I love this whole idea of creativity and bringing that in as a way to support yourself through big transitions. So maybe if we could start by just having you share more about yourself and maybe what inspired you to do the work that you do and your path and all the things.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks. I'm happy to share that part. So my path, I think, was in some ways set for me because I'm someone who's always been really curious about how people work, what they're thinking, kind of what's behind the scenes and stuff. And so since high school, I've been really interested in psychology and, human nature and all that kind of stuff. But for a while, I was a preschool teacher. I've done that kind of work. And through that process, I really gained an appreciation for art making, and art activities with children specifically. And when I came around to a local art therapy program, I thought, well, that just makes a whole lot of sense, right? So what's interesting about that is that I decided to go into it for that reason that I just mentioned, which is, oh, I think this will be a great thing to work with kids around. Um, I had no idea, right, that it was going to be for adults. I have no art background. I don't have formal training in art or anything like that. And so the challenge came when they required me to do 6 units of art myself, right? Because of course I have to go through the experience in order to know what my clients are going to go through. And that was really intimidating, like it is for a lot of people. But I was really grateful for that experience at the same time because it kind of helped me tap into that creative side of myself and open up a little bit more, like find a little bit more fluidity within myself. And so once I started tapping into that, then there was this alignment that happened, right? Oh, wow, art making and the creative process helps me. And so of course it's going to be helpful to the people that I work with, right? It was not an easy journey because a lot of the people that I went to school with were MFAs, right? And they did this amazing art. I'm like,
Agreed.
So I've shared this with you before, but I like to tell people that I'm a stick figure artist. Right? Because it helps everybody kind of relax when they're worried about, art making and whatnot. And I said, I don't have formal training. It's just that as an art therapist, I know and understand the value of the art making process, right? For creative expression. So that's, a little bit about me and how I got into art therapy, but specifically how I started working with women was that I'm also a trained psychotherapist, and I've had a private practice in Northern California for, going on 15 years. And primarily I've worked with young children and their parents. And through that process, I was able to identify this theme, right, that I could also relate to as a woman, where many of the moms that I was working with were struggling with, feeling self-doubt and feeling like they're not doing it right, and like they're bad moms, and a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of wanting to do things right. And it was just something that kept showing up consistently. And eventually, after we were done with the work with the children, the moms would come to me and continue their own personal work which I think is just amazing, that they were able to be brave enough to dive into that, for themselves and for their kids. So once that theme was established and it was a theme that I could identify with, it's like, oh, wow, this is really a need out there. There's so many women that are struggling with feeling like they're not good enough, like they're not doing it right. There must be something wrong with them, right? Because they can't do the things other people do, whatever that means, that comparison stuff that's always happening. And so because of that, it just really became my passion, to work with women and help them identify those voices, those messages that are lingering around in their head, in their bodies, and help them find a new way, of thinking about themselves and how they're operating in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting too, Miriam, how you had started with the children. And I always imagine I used to teach, I didn't work with children that were that young, but they're just so free and they're able to just be creative and sort of put it all out there. And it feels like as we get older and have more life experience, there are more like little gray clouds that kind of come over us. And we're like, oh, I can't do that. And I shouldn't do that. And
Right.
it's not appropriate. And tapping into that inner child and playing and being creative, it just changes and shifts you in a way that, I mean, we just don't make time for it nowadays. And I think that's the struggle as, we're older and we have more responsibilities and children and work and family and all the things. Like, I mean, I remember growing up and my mom did a lot of crafting. So maybe that was
Hmm.
the adult version of getting creative. And I do that too sometimes around the holidays. Like I'll create a holiday craft or something. And I'm like, why am I not doing this like once a month or with some girlfriends? Really creates, there's some sort of feeling that comes from doing that. And
Right.
I'm curious with your clients when you work with them and they're able to kind of shed all the other stuff and actually dig in and get creative, what ends up like coming about for them? Like what is that like for those listeners that haven't been creative in so long?
Right, right, I know. I mean, I think first I want to address the fear a little bit, because that is real. Like I said, that was my own experience, as I was going into the graduate program, and again being around all these people that had, art degrees and art backgrounds and that kind of a thing. But I think that our fear and our apprehension about art making and creativity comes from like our societal definition of what art is or isn't. And there's a lot of rigid rules about that, and so when we compare ourselves to that, which a lot of the time people just interpret that as somebody who can, say, draw perfectly, life forms, that kind of a thing. But that doesn't really mean anything, right? Because art making and creativity are just about expression.
Mm,
They're about inner expression. And so with art therapy, and certainly the creative expression process that I teach, right? It's more about, how does this process influence you? How does it impact you? How does it help? How does it heal, right? So to answer your question, I think when it comes to art making and the creative process, the list of the benefits it's so long, you know? But I think it starts with being able to be mindful and present with yourself. So you're taking a little bit of time here, to sit with yourself and, whatever it is that your creative process is. It doesn't have to be drawing. It doesn't have to be painting, right? It can be cooking. It can be project making, or organizing. It can be so many different things, right? But that you're allowing the creative process to be there and exist, right? But when it comes to art making specifically, it's something that taps into your nervous system itself. And so when you're creating, especially when you're having some intention around clearing stress or a challenging emotion or experience or something like that, you're literally helping these emotions and these hormones that are, flowing through your body in those moments of stress. You're helping all of that just kind of move through your body. And
Mm,
so you don't stay stuck in that stress mode, right? Because that's part of
wow.
what we're missing, in our society. We don't understand that we have to get through a stress cycle. Like our body, that's where stress lives. It lives in our body, right? And so when we get stressed out and we get into that fight or flight mode, we often stay there because we exacerbate the problem by then putting ourselves down.
Yes, yes. And I often think of that as like clean pain versus dirty pain, where we could have the pain of something, and that's the clean pain. And then the dirty pain kicks in when we start beating ourselves up about the feelings
Yeah.
we're having that are painful.
Right,
Wow.
exactly,
So it kind of
exactly.
squashes
So
that.
then when we do that, we stay in that fight or flight mode,
Yeah.
basically, and so that's why we feel stuck. That's where stuckness comes from. We're kind of in that frozen state in our bodies and in our minds,
That
right?
makes sense, Miriam, because when I work with those that are going through divorce, which is, one of those transitions where you're always heightened and stressed and worried and all the things,
Mhm.
we always say it's so hard to make decisions when you're in that space because your system is so activated, your brain isn't in a space where it can actually think and function for you. So it probably sounds very similar where you have to calm the body and calm the stress so that the other parts of you can actually work and function.
Exactly. I mean, you nailed it. It's a myth that we're not going to feel stress and that we're always going to be clear-headed, so that's really another obstacle that shows up for women a lot is these unrealistic expectations. Like that's not realistic. And when I say that I teach women about their womanity is because I want women to understand that they're human first and foremost, and a lot of what you're feeling in your body, what you experience, like those are all like normal human experiences basically, right? But we don't know that, and so we kind of freak out and judge it and judge ourselves, because again, there's this myth in our culture that we're supposed to be perfect and, you know, have
Yeah.
our stuff together all the time and, that kind of a thing. And that just sets up an unrealistic expectation that's going to make people feel like they're failing all the time because that's unachievable, right? So when you're in that stress cycle and you do a little doodling, right? And here we go again with it's not about your art ability, right? I did say the word doodle out loud,
I
right?
love
You can have a little fun and you can really get connected to what you're feeling. So for example, if you're feeling some anger, like what color would anger be? And have some fun Crayola markers for yourself,
it.
close by and some, pads of paper or whatever. And whatever color calls to you, reach out to it and use that color. So even in that very small step, that seems small anyway, it's actually really significant because you're already tapping into yourself and your inner knowing and your wisdom because whatever it is that's calling to that color, it's inside you. And it's looking already for how is it that I can help, right? So from the moment you choose the color, and then the second step, maybe you start moving the pen around and what is the rate of speed of this particular emotion? A lot of people feel anger very rapidly, it's very fast. So maybe you do some really fast scribbling. Maybe it's very jagged because it's so uncomfortable, but as as your brain starts to move out of that survival mode, you're going to notice your body physiology change. And you might even notice that the type of scribble or doodle changes, like maybe it starts to slow down, you know? And so it's really amazing because you're watching your brain in action basically through the doodle.
I love that. And you're moving the emotion, right? You're getting it out of
Hmm.
you. I worked with children. We used to talk often about how emotions are meant to pass through your body, not be
Hmm.
housed there and kept there. So, what are the ways that we can get them out? Talking, crying, running around, moving the energy. But I love this because you could simply do this if you are in the workplace or you're at your desk in a space where
Yep.
you can't jump around and scream or do all of the other things. You can just sit there and move energy through the creative.
Yes,
It's
absolutely.
fascinating, Miriam. Honestly, when I went through my divorce, that was my biggest life transition that just really shook me. And I had set up little processes for myself to help, or essentially rituals to help me
Hmm.
get through. I mean, it was literally like a moment by moment thing. So I had like a little nighttime ritual, I had a morning ritual, but I never incorporated any of this creativity. That would have been fascinating to have something in there, either, at a certain point in my day, maybe, where I
Hmm.
sat down and actually moved some emotion creatively. I think it's fascinating and critical to add.
Well, I mean, I love that you're saying that because to be honest with you, I actually don't think it's too late. That's the thing about it because you can either use the creative process spontaneously, like I just showed, I'm really angry and I have this deep emotion. And so I'm going to dive into this right now and, work through it through my doodle, or something like that. Or you can actually be more intentional and say, I really need to spend some time, with maybe some unresolved feelings about a particular issue in my life. It kind of keeps showing up. So it's there, right?
Yeah,
So let me hang out with it for a little bit. And again, just to move the pens around, you're not going through any kind of form per se,
okay.
right? You can if you want to, but that's not the idea or the goal. It's just that you're helping yourself move through. And the beauty of it is that as the image shows up, it gives you information about your inner experience. Like, oh, maybe you see an image there that's meaningful to you, or maybe the color is soothing, or maybe the color is validating, right? But either way, whatever the inner experience is now on this paper. And so the page holds your experience. And now
Oh
you can interact with it in this other way, right?
my gosh. Yes, yes, I love that. It's almost as if some of the stuff, a lot of the time we get stuck in our minds and things are ping-ponging and swirling around. And just to get them out, I mean, it's feedback for yourself to
Yeah,
sort of see what's
absolutely. I mean, I love that you say that because I think that's just what happens to us a lot. And, it's nobody's fault. I mean, that's just part of being a human. But we kind of leave our bodies and we exist in our heads, for hours at a time. And it's like, oh, wow, what's going on with my body? Sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm kind of stiff or, or I'm not sitting right, or something like that. And that's just a sign that maybe you need to spend a little time connecting, whatever that means, and to sit and do a little doodle. On my website, I have like a little PDF where you could download 10 different ways of doodling. So you
oh,
could actually do it more intentional like that too. Like, oh, circles are really soothing. I think I'll do a bunch of circles, or little flowers or, whatever your doodle is, so to speak. And you can find your own way, right? But it's all coming from inside you, tapping into that inner knowing, what you need, right? Because no matter which doodle you choose at any particular time, you are listening to whatever is inside you that's telling you to do that.
oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. Miriam, we have to take a quick break. So we are going to take a fast break. And then when we come back, you host different classes, and I'd love to hear like what you offer because I see them floating through on social media. So maybe we can talk more about that as well and dive in there when we get back.
Absolutely.
So we'll take a quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere.
Well,
We are back, and we left off with Myriam sharing a couple of really important points. When you are participating in something artistic, art therapy, for example, that art is for you, and that's not for you to perform to any particular standard for what the outside world might be looking for or wanting. There are parameters around it. So if you've got fears around that, let it go, let it go, let it go.
Yes, and art is therapy.
Art is therapy. Yes, yes, and we don't tap into that enough as
Mhm,
adults.
mhm.
We
And
really
and
don't.
like you were saying before, it's a great way to just help yourself let go and let things just flow. We're so worried about getting things right all the time, and it's a great place to just make a mess and let it let it be that and just
I
have some fun.
love it. Like all this talk for me, I'm so excited. I want to either go to Michael's and grab some things and like create something at home or do some artwork. Nobody would want to see it or post it up in their home or frame it. But for me, just
For
to get more
you, that's right.
out, right?
Exactly,
Absolutely.
exactly.
So, Miriam, you host different workshops and classes and different things. What are some of the themes that you've done or classes that you've had before?
Well, my favorite ongoing one that I actually have coming up later in June is Doodle Your Stress Away. So that's when we really dive into how doodling helps your nervous system, your body, how it helps you relieve stress, all of the benefits of doodling. And we actually do some live demos during the webinar and have a lot of fun with the different types of doodling that we can get into. So when we say doodling, it sounds kind of simplistic, but there's actually quite more to it than people think. So it's fun to get into that and help people discover the power of just getting into art materials no matter what. Because even though when I do the doodling class, I use, just regular markers, it's something you can do with any medium.
Okay, okay. So you could use your kids' crayons, a marker, a pen, whatever
Mhm.
you can.
Watercolor, acrylic, whatever you want to do, just let it go. Just be loose about it and just have some fun. And like I said, if you spend enough time with your art piece, it can provide you with valuable info. So that's how I kind of like to look at it when I teach classes is how can this art expression, this creative expression, with this particular medium, whatever it might be, help you move through wherever it is that you feel stuck, you know? So a lot of the times, like in the beginning of the year, I like to do a create your vision workshop, which is I call it a vision board workshop on steroids because we really do some active work around letting go of the previous year and helping ourselves transition into the new. And so many art materials are used to be able to do that. And there's a lot of tactile experiences, all of those senses are getting activated, and people just have so much fun and walk away with just amazing insights and plans, for what they want to do for the year. And I encourage them to check in with their vision boards throughout the year if they want to zero in on a specific area or something like that, and make another vision board out of that. Like, you just keep going, right? Whatever your heart is saying around that, like, trust that it's trying to give you information.
I love that. And for those who aren't familiar with vision boards, it's essentially this board that you create and you put things on it that you want to see come to fruition in your
Mhm,
life, right? So it's a way of kind of creating your own little future crystal ball.
mhm.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
a way, yeah, in a way. And it keeps you motivated to move towards whatever it is that you want to change or have be different in your life. So anyway, it's just another fun way to be able to dive into art making and feel, gain empowerment from that process, because you are an authority of the whole thing from start to finish, and that feels really good.
Yes. And I imagine too, if you wanted to incorporate it with your family or your significant
Oh,
other, you could create a little,
it's limitless.
oh my God.
It's limitless what you can do, and I often share with people that at my desk, I keep a little tiny travel watercolor pad, and I have, like, a little notebook that I use, and so I'll fluctuate between, markers and doodling or just drawing little stick figures or just splattering a bunch of paint, or whatever. But that is part of how I keep things flowing so that I don't have that stuckness during the day. So on a physiological level, it has that impact.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine. I love that idea of having the means to be creative, like right in the middle of the day, just to get some things moving. I used to have
Mhm.
on my desk when I worked in person with teens, I used to have like a sand tray. It was actually a sand tray, and then they could come in and like move, and it often helped facilitate conversation. But I imagine with art, I mean, times 10, because you're actually creating and then you're discussing and sharing, and there's just so much more to it.
Right. I mean, it's tapping into these deeper unconscious parts of your brain. I mean, that's what's valuable about it. So stuff that's outside of your reach might emerge, in one of your art pieces. And you're like, oh, that's interesting information, or that's helpful, or is that what was happening? Whatever. But it can always offer something. And I think that's the beauty of it. And I think for women specifically, Holly, like I said in my bio, women are created by nature. We are creators, right? So when we're not tapping into our creativity, we're starting to get stuck. We're starting to kind of feel the consequence of that a little bit. And we feel that in lots of different ways, whether it's physiological, like feeling pain in your body, headaches, that kind of stuff, or whether it's just existing in that survival mode and feeling like you never have time for yourself, resentment,
Yeah.
irritability, that kind of low key irritability, that kind of stuff shows up because you're not like accessing this beautiful stuff that's inside you that's just dying to get expressed, in some way. And so once you start incorporating that, even in little tiny practices, like, oh, I'm just going to splatter a bunch of watercolor for a few minutes, right? Nothing formal, nothing, no pressure, right? It's something that is going to offer so much benefit
Oh my
at
God.
the end, right? And women need to be able to do that. We prioritize like housework and things like that over, spending some time creating. And that's very important. And it has to shift, I think.
Yeah, I think we get caught up in the tasks. So a couple things when you were saying that. I think we get caught up in the tasks of doing things. So when we have a chance to relax, sometimes that turns into taking something off of the to-do list, throwing in a load of laundry. But when it comes to the creative, like you were saying, just diving in and doing something for you to be creative and move energy. And you even alluded at the beginning of our conversation that, you know, cooking or organizing, I
Yes.
guess as long as it's not with the intention of like getting a task done, but like if you just like you want to bake a batch of cookies for fun or something that delights you, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not a huge cook, but I know people who are definitely artists in their ability to cook and bring together ingredients, and they treat it like an art, and the stove is their canvas, and so it's totally possible. Absolutely. It's just about tapping into your creative process. But I think what I like about using art material is that it's a tangible way to get your nervous system and your whole body moving so that even if you want to, plant that garden or whatever, and you're kind of like, "Ah, I just can't get there," the art process can help you get there. Because
That's
as soon
really
as you start
cool.
flowing, you're like, okay, I'm ready to go do that thing that I really wanted to do. So it's very, very helpful in that way.
Kind of gets your engine going, kind of gets the engine revved. I hadn't thought about it in that way. When I need to get
Absolutely.
something going, that can be the facilitator of getting it going. And
Mhm.
another piece too that I thought was really important that I wanted to make sure we don't miss, this idea that with art, we're really working that from the inside out. And I think in our world, we're so used to looking to the external, what needs to be done, what do I have to do? Like our eyes are looking
Mhm.
outward. And so we don't tap into what's in there. And then you brought up the nervous system a couple different times. And for those who aren't familiar with like what our nervous system is about and why it matters that we pay attention to it or not. Do you want to share a little bit about that piece?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. I forget that I sometimes need to clarify so that people can understand exactly what I'm saying because it's actually really, really important and valuable information, right? I mean, our brain is designed to protect us in essence. Its primary job is to keep us alive, right? Which is a good goal. Thank you, brain. That's very helpful. But sometimes the way that it does that are they're not helpful ways, right? So when we're talking about our survival brain, and specifically we're talking about our amygdala, it can't differentiate between actual threat or perceived, right?
Mm,
As far as it's concerned, that's an actual tiger running towards you, or that's a giant stack of paperwork that's a little bit overwhelming, right? So it's not very helpful in that regard, right? Because it can't help us differentiate. And so when we go into the stress response, right, and our cortisol goes up and our adrenaline goes up and our body's preparing for that fight, flight, or freeze, that's something that human beings are really only supposed to experience, like what we're programmed for a few times a day, like an occasional running from a tiger, something like that. But we're living in that state all the time or most of the time. And so living in that constant high peak end of the stress cycle without helping ourselves come out of it, right? Stresses our organs out, our body, right? And so we start to experience sometimes physical manifestations of not getting out of the stress cycle as often as we need to. So when we're fiddling around with art making, right? It helps us move out of that stress place, right? And we all know that place because we're very irrational, because as we were talking about before, our rational brain can't be on at the same time as our survival brain. They just can't work together at the same time. So when we're in our fight or flight, we think everything is life or death, right? And then as we calm down, we kind of go, oh, that wasn't so bad. Something like that. I think we've all experienced that. And it's a perfect example of how we go through the stress cycle where we peak and everything seems like it's the end of the world. And then when we come out of that, everything's actually maybe okay, right?
yeah,
Maybe it didn't go in your favor. Or I'm not saying it's, sugar coated or anything, but, you land back in a more clear state, more rational state. So you can look at the situation from that place instead of from
yeah.
that hyper aroused place, right?
Right. No, I love that. And especially like for those who are listening and going through a transition, you're
Hmm.
kind of heightened and stressed and on high alert
Oh,
all the time. So use art, creativity, your little tools that you have at home. Treat yourself, order a couple things off of Amazon or whatnot, and have
absolutely.
something set up on the corner of your desk so you can take breaks and calm the nervous system, bring the stress levels down, bring the cortisol
Hmm.
down, right?
Exactly. Just kind of help yourself through a little bit. And you're being so good to your body, when you're doing that. And your body's so grateful to you when you're so kind to it in that way. It's so important to tap into that. And it's such beautiful self care because it incorporates so many benefits.
Great way to love yourself. This is an example of loving yourself. Doing something creative
Absolutely.
is one
Absolutely.
example of how to love yourself.
And you know what, Holly? I'll add this. It's something that I actually say a lot, and I've blogged about it and everything, which is, and maybe this comes from my preschool background and experience, right? When a little toddler grabs a bunch of paint and starts doing his or her thing, on their piece of paper, they walk away from that feeling really, really proud, And maybe to us it's a big giant mess, but to them it has meaning. They've expressed something. Sometimes they even see things we don't see, and we're like, okay, that's a flower, if you say so, right? Um, but it's so beautiful because it's innate, right?
Yeah.
And we lose that, as you said, because of these rules about what is art and what isn't art and what's an artist and what isn't an artist and that kind of a thing. But what I say is, if we look at that child, right, if we look at this little 2 or 3 year old, who are we to say he's not an artist? And who are we to say that that's not a piece of art. I
Yeah.
mean, that would be offensive to the artist,
Right.
right? And so if you look at it from that perspective, well, then that means any of us can make art,
Absolutely.
right?
I
Just
love that.
just let go.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Oh my gosh, Myriam, that's a perfect way for us to close out our conversation. Thank you so much for
You're so
everything
welcome.
today. Oh my goodness. And please let us know, Myriam, what's the best way for listeners to get in touch with you? Where can they find you?
Well, definitely check out my website, which is miriammartinezcoaching.com. And my name is spelled kind of uniquely. It's Myriam Martinez, Martinez coaching.com.
Awesome.
And right now they can take a peek at my next Doodle class to see if anybody's interested in doing that with me and having a little fun on the 28th.
That sounds so fun. Thank you again, Myriam, for being a guest on The Great Comeback. And thank you to our listeners for joining us in the conversation today. You can also find more information about coaching with me at hollymcclaincoaching.com. And one final thank you to Cece, my amazing producer who works her magic on the back end to make this show possible. Join me again next time and have a great rest of your week and be well.